Good afternoon, everybody, or should I say good day? This is Alan Falcon, CEO of Cumulus Global, and I want to welcome you to our January 2022 third Tuesday at 3 webcast series event, Keep IT Simple, or Keep It Simple. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy day and week to join us here today, whether you're here on the live session or you're watching the video recording of this webcast on demand. Couple of housekeeping items, typical before we get into the meat of the conversation here today. You'll notice the audio is muted to prevent any background noise from disrupting the session here today. So if at any point in time you have a question or a comment or would like to engage in the conversation, you'll notice along the top or right-hand side of the screen, there are a couple of icons. One of them opens a questions window. Please put your question in there because it lets me know that the question's been asked and track to make sure I've got them all answered before we wrap up here today. And we will have time for extended Q&A at the end of the session, as well as taking questions throughout the presentation. As with all of our webcasts, the session's being recorded. We generally get it posted within 24 hours. We'll send you a link when it's available to view on demand. Feel free to share that link with any coworkers or acquaintances if you think they'd find the information valuable. In addition to our third Tuesday at 3 webcast series recordings, we have other resources in the resource library on our website. And on our website, we're active bloggers. We've got a library with relevant ebooks and white papers. And we also have a Coffee and Clouds webcast series. Those are a little more pointed and shorter in duration. And when you see a Coffee and Clouds series event, if you attend live or watch the recording on demand, at your option, we're happy to send you a Dunkin' or Starbucks gift card. So you attend the series, and you attend the cloud information session, and we provide the coffee as part of the Coffee and Cloud series. So again, thanks for joining us today. As we talk about keeping IT simple, keeping it simple, we'll start out talking with the challenges and then look at some of the solutions and directions and sort of help you roadmap your way forward. And when we talk about the challenges we're currently facing, particularly given the significant impact that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on so many of our businesses, we'll start with looking at the evolving role of IT services, particularly in small and very small businesses and in our overall SMB community. And sort of how what we used to look at is shadow IT, the unofficial use of IT services by ourselves or staff members, really could be renamed COVID IT, and why that's an issue and the impact that has. And we'll also look at sort of the budget and value of IT services for small businesses, with the understanding that oftentimes, there are obviously things as small business owners we need to do, but there are other things that we should do as part of best practice. And that always comes against, our budget and how much can we afford, and, what percentage of our income and our revenue stream are we going to cost out towards provisioning those IT services. So IT services are certainly evolving. And we see 4 major ways, particularly over the last, 6 to 18 months, that things have changed, and maybe a little bit longer even. The first is the role of collaboration. So much of the work we do now is no longer my work, it's our work. We've moved from me to us. And there's some studies right now that say, for people who use computers as a primary tool for their job every day, the percentage of work that's collaborative now is up in the 65 to 87% range, sort of depending on your role in the industry you're in. That's pretty significant. It means you're not just having a task that you do and you turn into someone else. You need to be communicating and working with others. Now, that could be coworkers within your company. It could be people in your supply chain. It could be clients or your customers or other businesses you need to partner with to deliver the full range of services. The second area is communications. And we've gone from the expectation that communications are synchronous to really asynchronous. I mean, they're going to happen at every time. So, simple example and sort of an old example is, preparing a document. It used to be I'd write a version of a document, I'd email to 3 people, they'd mark their changes up and email me copies back. It's, not the way we're working anymore. Now, I have the ability to write that document. People can get in and make comments or edits if I allow while I'm writing and editing, or they can put comments in and I get notified to look at it there. The key is that the work can still be synchronous, but it can also be in real time or asynchronous. And there's only ever one copy of the document, right? So we look at that for one mechanism of communications going from synchronous to asynchronous. The other is a lot of what we used to do by waiting for the in-person meeting or sending a memo or an email to get back to now is done more instantaneously using chat, voice, and even more popular now, video conferencing. And the fact that one or two clicks, you can check to see if someone's available to chat for a few minutes. You can work with them in real time, discuss issues, make decisions, and go on your way without having to necessarily schedule a formal meeting or get a group together and post an agenda. Really facilitates that asynchronous working style. The third is productivity. And a lot of the history of how we use computers and how we use technologies is it lets us do things faster, right? So and really interestingly enough, the early computer was, hey, we can do all these computations faster. Oh, we can run payroll faster. We can do these calculations and generate graphs or data, business intelligence faster. For small businesses in particular, it's not just the speed now that is helping productivity. It's the efficiency, right? So certainly having an electronic calendar is faster as far as scheduling appointments. But the scheduling tools that are now part of Office Suite environments like Microsoft 365 actually make the process more efficient. They remove steps. So it's not just, how much time does it take me to perform a task? It's, how many steps does it take and how much of that can be automated? And that's, that's a huge shift. And it's particularly relevant to solopreneurs where, your time is money in most cases directly. And how you're spending your time determines how much time you have to service your clients, to market, to sell, to support, to do your accounting, your bookkeeping, etc. All the aspects of running a business. And in small businesses, we see that as well. Efficiency gains, even if they're small, they add up and they can have a big impact on the amount of time you need to spend working and how you spend your time throughout your workday and work week. And the fourth area where we see pretty significant evolution in IT services is the financial impact. And here, there was a time when personal computers were really expensive. It was considered a major investment. Now it's a necessity. You really can't run a business or perform most jobs without some level of computer resources and computing support. And so the focus early on, and in particularly early on with cloud, was, is this going to make it less expensive for me than doing it the other way? And how can I save money? How can I minimize cost? And the shift we see with IT services is the recognition that it's not just about cost, it's about the value. What value does this bring to the business? And so you can look and say, hey, I'm doing, I have this resource and I'm doing it, way X, or, following plan A or process A, and it costs me $5 per unit. If I change it, it might cost me $7 per unit, but I increase my productivity by 80%. Or let's not be so aggressive. I improve it by 50%. The value of spending that additional money is there. Actually, the value is outweighed, the value it brings to the business outweighs the cost. And because of that, it could be an advantageous thing to do. And we see a lot more solopreneurs, small, mid-sized business owners, focusing on the value and not just the cost. And that is some incremental investment or incremental operating cost going to pay back and improve productivity, higher quality of services, better client or customer engagement, smoother supply chain, better management of resources. And all of that comes into consideration. And in some cases, that sort of drives complexity. And it has driven complexity. And so when we look at the growth of cloud, there's a company out that we work with called Blissfully that manages companies and individuals' relationship with their cloud services. And And they have a huge data set and do annual surveys. In the most recent survey, they sort of looked at the number of cloud applications in use per company. And so we look in, and I would have preferred a little more granular definition under apps here on the slide. But when we look at companies with 1 to 100 employees, the average number of apps per company is 100. And that sounds like a lot, but if you think about, the app is any service that you use or need to log into to perform a function, that makes sense. So it's, email and calendar and your file storage, your video conferencing, your phone system. You have spam filters and antivirus protection. You may use a service like Adobe to manage signatures or DocuSign to manage signatures, and and contracting processes. It goes on and on. And so Blissly also looks at relationships, and relationships is a better measure because it captures the complexity, right? And so you've got different roles within a company: your IT administrator, users, person responsible for paying the bill, the contract owner. And to that, you've got your vendor that's providing a service, and there's licensing. You can be charged for licensing usage, data amount, etc. And so each relationship is one person to one application or one service. And when you look here, it's a little more granular. When we look at even very small businesses, companies with 10 or fewer employees, the average number of relationships is 47. And so, that's saying, if you assume every company in there was 10 people, that the average person, the average company, each person has between 4 and 5 applications that they're interacting with on a regular basis. For smaller companies, that average is there, and it's, could obviously be higher than that. As we move up in size and you look at the 11 to 50, 51 to 100, 101 to 200 bracket, the average number of relationships grows. And that's because we started building complexity. And there are reasons for the complexity. One, it's, hey, as companies, we're trying to deploy cloud services that meet the needs. Employees feel they have a need that's not met. In larger companies, departments make their own purchasing decisions in some instances. In smaller businesses and even large companies, individual users may elect to sign up for a service and use it individually, with or without the blessing of the company and the IT folks or management. And so you start getting these complex relationships, and that relates to complexity in management, administration. It introduces security risks, and it increases your cost. And so we want to simplify it there. So when you look at a 2-year trend, and really this is looking at, the chart on the right is multiple years, but when we look at year over year, and we don't have the data compiled yet for 2021. So this is 2020 versus 2019. When we look at what small businesses are spending on software as a service type products, and that's everything from, Microsoft 365 to QuickBooks Online, to Salesforce or HubSpot, any application or service that you're buying in the cloud. Small business spending was up by 50%. The number of unique apps jumped by 30%. The apps churn, and these are apps that are canceled or deleted, no longer used, 30% per year. So the number of apps that companies, said, well, okay, we were using it, we're going to stop using it, jumped by 30%. So there's a lot more switching going on, and waste, which are duplicate subscriptions within a company, or orphans, applications that are being paid for and nobody's using, have more than doubled year to year. And with the impact of COVID-19, the interesting thing is, March 2020 was the explosion of COVID-19, and this data is looking at 2020 versus 2019. When we get the data for 2021, where the entire year was impacted by COVID, where businesses realized that having remote or hybrid work environments wasn't a short-term fix, it was a mid, possibly long-term issue, and adjusted their IT spending and their prioritization to meet that, I expect these numbers to be similar or even higher going forward. And so the cost is real. And when we look at a 2-year growth rate per cloud application category, we'll see that there wasn't as much growth in business operations, marketing, sales, financing types functions. So people are pretty set. There's still growth, but people have moved into Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace. They've decided whether they're going to use, HubSpot or MailChimp, or other tools, or Salesforce, other tools there. They might have decided they want to use Intact or, Sage or QuickBooks Online for accounting, or Dynamics 365. Some of those core decisions have been made and are fairly stable. You continue to see what we would say is, normal growth. Those business operation type of applications are still growing a little more than 20% per year. But the growth indicates emerging needs, the largest being IT and security. Not much of a surprise there, given the prevalence of cyber attacks and how they're no longer just on enterprises. They're hitting schools and governments and small, mid-sized businesses by the tens of thousands each year. New tools for customer support, as well as human resources. Not surprising here either. Why customer support? Well, as companies went into remote and hybrid and changed the way they work, it also changed the way we were interacting with our customers. And so having better tools to manage those interactions became less of a luxury and more of an essential. Similarly, the change in work environment and work patterns meant more need to better manage our staff and our relationship with our staff. And it's not just about how much you're paid and your benefits. It's about communication. It's about support. It's about services. And so we saw growth in human resources and customer support. Both of those areas are also areas that can be quite labor intensive, particularly customer support. So if there's technology we could bring in that automates and helps us operate more efficiently in customer support and reduces our back office costs and HR and those processes and procedures and labor intensive activities, then it's worth that investment as well. So a couple of different angles support the intense growth in those three categories, with an overall impact of 2-year growth rate of over 27, almost 28% in cloud applications. And so the cost is increased, and so is the complexity. And here, we're looking at a pretty broad band size of companies. I have the data for 101 to 1,000 employees, not as relevant to our usual attendance here on the webcast. So we'll look at this, 1 to 100 employee break. And what we're finding is, and again, this is a pretty broad average, right? So on average in that space, companies are spending almost, over $5,700 per employee per year on cloud services. If you average in that space, the average size of a company is 35 employees with 102 apps and an average of 624 of those relationships. And so that, is really saying that, each employee is running about 20 apps on average. And that's not surprising, but it is significant. And when we look at, 2-year app turnover, okay, we see that over the last 2 years, 35% of the applications that were in use have been dropped, but new apps have been added, representing 31% of the app. So you have 60+% turnover in the applications that are in use. So there's some constant change. Additionally, as a side thing, when we talk about simplifying IT, is who's paying for these cloud apps isn't always consistent. Ideally, everything goes through IT. IT has a budget. Invoices come in. IT validates that they're valid. Finance team pays the invoice. Given that so many cloud apps, an individual employee in your company or you yourself can sign up for it with your own credit card. You might be paying for it with your card or getting reimbursed, or company credit card. We've seen instances where, interestingly enough, in some organizations where the salespeople just decided, for sharing information with my prospective clients, it's easier. I just pay for my own Dropbox for business account. I don't even bill the company. I don't want them to know. I don't want them to worry about it. I'm just going to do it. I'll pay for it. It's coming out of my earnings. I don't care because it makes me more efficient. And that adds complexity. We also find that most companies have orphan subscriptions, things they're paying for, not using, and duplicate subscriptions where they have more than one entity in the company is subscribed to a service and they're effectively paying twice. So when I look at this and the complexity and the impact, there are a couple of things that come to mind. One, how did we see this growth and how did we end up with so many applications, so much money, and so much complexity? Well, the benefits clouds have better acceptance than they did 2-3 years ago, and certainly more than 5 or 6 years ago, and definitely more than 15 years ago when we started offering cloud services. It's no longer a matter of if you're using cloud services, it's when should you use them, which aspects of your business should be cloud and which shouldn't, and how can you best use cloud. And so the acceptance is there. So of course you're going to see an increase. Shifts in how we run our business, how our people and our team members are working certainly drove need, and expediency, particularly in the rapid move at the onset of COVID to move from in-person offices to remote work or hybrid environments. A lot of what was being done, shadow IT, unauthorized, still detrimental to the business, decisions on who's buying and paying for which services really became COVID IT. It became acceptable. In the scramble to get people to do their jobs from home and make sure they had the right access and security and permissions and equipment, companies were saying to people, oh wait, you've got a Dropbox business account of your own, then fine, you're set. You can share files with our customers. And not, and sometimes the need to do something right now is greater than the need to do it right. And so in the instance of COVID and the scramble really over a whole fiscal quarter or calendar quarter to get businesses so they could survive without having their offices open or with limited access and attendance at their office, the right of way became more important than the right. And we've been saying for a while now that, look, some of the fundamental changes, some of the, what we thought was interim or midterm changes due to COVID are now going to at some level be permanent in the way we think about work, the way we think about how we run our businesses, the way we think about how we collaborate with our peers, how we service our customers and communicate with our customers. Fundamental differences. We're not going totally back. We may not stay exactly where we have been, but we're not going totally back to the way it's going to be before. It's somewhere in between. And so we've been advocating for more than 6 months now that it's time for companies, particularly small businesses, to step back and say, okay, what did we do to respond? How much of that is good long-term strategy? Did we create waste and inefficiency in our, expediency, and how can we regain that, manage our costs, simplify the environment, and move forward in a more coordinated and productive way? And I'll also point out that this chart, for all the big numbers and complexity, it doesn't include the consumer or free services that might be in play that your employees might be using because they're unaware or unable to do what they believe they need to do within the IT services that you as a company are providing to them. And so here, the call to action is really to simplify. And in no particular order, we want to simplify for consistency of tools and services and workflow and process, because that's where you can you gain efficiency and value, and you can identify future opportunities for efficiency and value. Simplifying IT is necessary for security. The more things you have and the more they interact with each other and the more human involvement there is in those things, the higher the risk for being a victim of attack, suffering a breach, or making a mistake where you have a data leak or accidental disclosure of information you shouldn't. And sometimes it's benign. Much of the time it's damaging. It can be damaging, if not to you and your business financially, to your reputation, to your relationship with customers, vendors, etc. Simplifying makes it easier. Security also makes it easier to provide data protection. And while security is focused on, the outside attack and keeping things from leaking, protection is like, if something goes wrong, can my business still run? Can I recover my data? Can I restore my machines? Can I continue to work while repairs are being made, or things that were broken are being fixed? That sort of continuity need. Efficiency, simplification, as I mentioned, consistency leads to efficiency. Efficiency is key for getting the most value out of your IT. And that leads into simplifying helps your costs and improves the value and lets you manage that cost value balance more effectively for your organization. And so what's the process for Simplify? The first step, okay, balloons in the graphic because it's not rocket science, right? Is to start with discovery. Most small businesses know what they're using. Okay, not everyone does, or not everyone knows everything they're using. There's certainly times where IT service providers put in tools or services that are back-end and managerial, where it doesn't have, executives and owners may have signed off on it because they were told it was necessary. It's not something that they see or would be aware of on a daily basis. But in general, you know what you're using. The next question is, do you know, what do you not know you're using? What are the other IT services and tools that are in play? Whether the company's paying for it, whether it's individuals paying for it out of their own pocket, or whether they're free services that employees, staff members, et cetera, have taken on. And when you look at that, it's not just black and white saying, if we know it, it's good. If we don't know it's bad. You need to understand who's using it, why they're using it, and how they're using it. And the reason for those understanding the who, how, and why is because then you go to analyze your environment. And you start with the analysis with your business goals and objectives. How are you running your business? What are you trying to achieve? What challenges are you trying to overcome? What are your short-term, goals versus your long-term goals? You really want to have that, if nothing more than bullet points jotted down somewhere so that those drive your IT decisions. Because every IT decision you make should directly or indirectly support your business goals and objectives and help you reach the outcomes you want. With that, take the key activities and workflows you use to run your business. We don't need detailed maps. We just sort of need, to know what they are. If you're a consultant, your two key activities or workflows could be the requirements analysis for proposal and proposal creation and preparation and delivery of deliverables, right? If you take those and you say, okay, how's my IT environment? How are the tools I'm using, right? The who, the what, and the why, helping me with those key activities. And are we consistent across the organization? Look at how you communicate internally and externally. And when I talk about communicate, this isn't just, email, phone, how do I, what do I use to call and what do I use to email, and do we like to text or chat or video conference or not? It's all of that, but it's also, how do we work together? How do we share ideas? How do we make information available to one another? So this gets into, if you're in a creative industry, for example, maybe you're advertising or public relations, your clients are going to need to share information with you and share documents and files with you, and you're going to need to do vice versa. How you communicate isn't just, hey, you can email, how they upload or email to you. It's, okay, how do you access the information? How do you share your feedback? What does that flow look like? And how does that work for you? And again, that's internally and externally. And finally, here we go again with key applications, tools, and processes. And so applications and tools are the technologies, the process is how you use them. And this is where you can take, what you know and what you didn't know as far as applications and tools in use. And you take that, what, who, why, and how, and you expand on it. So how are we working, right? And so it gets into place. So some examples, and we'll get into examples of simplification in a few minutes. But if you analyze your environment, you're going to start to see a couple of things. You're going to start to see gaps, right? Areas, and by gaps, I don't mean something you're not doing. Okay, you might find things that you should be doing that you're not. More than likely, a gap is going to be that you do something. You have a workflow or a process or a communication need, and there is no consistent way that the company does it. Everyone does it differently, or everyone uses a different tool. If you're, and we've walked into companies where, depending on which project team member schedules the meeting, it will be Teams, Zoom, or WebEx, right? So the client that they're working with will have to learn and be aware of how to join in to all three of those platforms, or maybe exposed to a platform that they're not as familiar with, not because it's what your company uses, but because an individual in the company is using it. And it's not even consistent across the different individuals in the company those people outside your company are working with. We've seen that even internally in company. We were working with one company, and they happened to be on the Google Workspace platform, and about 40% of the company would just use the Google Meets facilities that was built in, and the rest of the company were using Zoom accounts. A third of those Zoom accounts were paid. The other 2/3 of those Zoom accounts, or 40% of the company, were using free Zoom service, which lacks features and some of the security that the paid Zoom service has. So here we have, and this is an example of a gap, right? There's no consistent way for handling online meetings and video conferences. And that creates confusion, because when people were sending meeting invites, there's automatically a Meet set up, but then in the description, there'd be a Zoom link. Which one do you join, right? Or people joining the wrong one, or confusing their Zoom links, et cetera, et cetera. So you look for the gaps, and then you can also look for the best practices. What's there, what's working well, what do you want to standardize moving forward? Now with that analysis, you can start to map out, create a roadmap for what you want your IT ecosystem to look like. And this is a strategic thought process. And we recommend starting with your productivity suite. Why? Because whether it's Google Workspace or Microsoft 365, those solutions are going to be the cornerstone for your communications, your collaborations, how you manage identities and access to not only those services, but other services. Even if you move into multi-factor authentication services, the fundamental, ID, user identity and password information and access information that's built into Google Workspace and Microsoft 365 becomes a cornerstone of your environment. It also can and should be the centerpiece for file and information sharing. And when I talked about communications, again, it's not just email, it's chat, it's meetings, it's appointment scheduling, video conferencing, document sharing, document storage. All of that comes into play. It becomes the cornerstone of, the office capability, back office and front office of your business. Okay. We then say, once you pick your suite, map any services and components in those environments that, that you have, services or components of services that you're running that duplicate capabilities within Google Workspace and Microsoft 365. So this goes into, we've seen people with third-party calendar scheduling tools that aren't necessary. Video conferencing and meeting tools are an obvious choice, where we see companies spending hundreds of dollars a month simply because they're haven't learned and aren't using effectively the meeting tools built into Google Workspace and Microsoft 365. We often see it with certain companies based on their needs for telephony services and the communications tools. We see companies not using the capabilities of these platforms to share files with their supply chain or with customers. And that list goes on. And sometimes it's an entire service that can be eliminated. Sometimes it's a component of an additional product or tool that you're running that overlaps with the capability. But creating that map is going to create duplicates. And it's going to identify places not only for cost savings, but for consistency of workflow and for process changes that'll improve individual and team productivity and efficiency. And so with that, with the gaps we looked at earlier, with the service mapping, it's time to migrate, right? And for each of those services, you have to decide, are you going to rehost it, replatform it, or repurchase it? Okay, and so rehosting is where you say, okay, something? I have a file server that people in the office can access to, have files. I've got, when they're out of the office, they have to VPN in or do a remote desktop to access those files. If I rehost those files into SharePoint file services or into shared drives in Google Workspace, everybody can access those files, whether they're in their office or not. I don't have to worry about VPN infrastructure and support and service. I don't need to worry about remote desktop or other technologies to provide access. And oh boy, I may be able to deprovision a server, lower costs, simplify backup and recovery, business continuity as well. Replatforming is when you fundamentally change the tools, where you might say, we're using, X system, but we're going to switch to Y because it better integrates with the security and access management, as well as other features of Google Workspace or Microsoft 365. And again, you may choose to repurchase and redistribute where the money is being spent as you look at your tools and you look at that simplification process. Now, your productivity suite isn't going to be the full answer, so you are going to need to layer in. When we talk about layering in, we're talking about adding things that you need, first of all, or secondly, that you want and are worth the investment and worth the operating expense. And there's two sides to this. There's the technical capability side, and there's the change management side. And expect to layer in both, because change management is the human factor that determines the success of the technical capabilities you add. Let me reiterate that. Change management is the human factor and the human investment that ensures the success of the technical capabilities that you're going to spend money on. And so most of the time, small businesses need to look at whether or not they need or want to layer in security requirements, particularly if there are business policies that need to be enforced, industry or regulatory requirements you need to adhere to. So it could be internal or external factors driving additional security. Oftentimes, this is things like archive and e-discovery. It might be rights management and intellectual property protection for confidential information. It might be having certain aspects of workflows tracked in an auditable way. It really depends on your business, how you operate, as well as the industry you're in and any regulatory requirements you're subject to. Next is data protection. Okay, and just like over the years, we've got used to making sure that, hey, our local server got backed up onto, tape, and those tapes went off site or got backed up to a local disk with a copy off site. Everything, whether it's on site or in the cloud, should be protected. And that's, basically you need backup recovery. Ideally, you want continuity so that if something happens, and particularly I look at solopreneurs and I'm like, okay, what happens if your laptop's stolen or your laptop, fails? The heat fan stops working, you don't realize it, the processor overheats, and the system won't boot, or it no longer functions. Okay, great. It may take you a day to get replacement parts put in, or you might need to replace a machine, and that could elapsed time take you 2 or 3 days to buy a machine, get it loaded up, restore all your data from backup, assuming you've got a good backup, right? So if you're a solopreneur, if you're out there as a consultant or an advisor to your clients, what's the impact if you're without your computer for 3 business days? If you're a small business of 5 employees and one of your employees is without a computer for 3 to 5 days, what's the impact on their work and on your business? So having a continuity solution might not be a need for most. I say it's closer to a need than a want, but it's certainly something I hope you'd want. Similar with data loss prevention, making sure that data isn't accidentally damaged or isn't accidentally leaked or isn't taken deliberately in a nefarious way. Additionally, you might layer in utilities to improve efficiency. You might look at tools that help you automate simple or repetitive tasks and look at single sign-on to further simplify the user experience. Okay, and again, something like single sign-on, particularly in the area where multi-factor authentication is so critical for securing ourselves against cyber attacks and identity theft and impersonation attacks that can cost your business hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of dollars. Single sign-on takes that needed capability of multi-factor authentication and presents it in a way that it's easier for the user to log in once and have access to everything they need. And so it's a simplified user experience at an incremental cost that improves your security and reduces your support requirements and the time you spend or downtime due to frustrations of password issues or access issues. On the human side now, if all this stuff is going to work and help your business and provide the capabilities you need without making it overly complex, then you have to do the human factor side and the change management, which includes removing apps and tools with duplicate features and functions. It's okay to say no to your employees. You want to educate and train your staff. Focus on how they can use the tools, given their specific roles and tasks, but more broadly on how to better and fully utilize existing apps and tools. And get the mindset of, hey, before I go sign up for something, how do I find out how I can do that, if I can do it and how I can do it, given the existing tools on my desktop? How do I learn? And so change management, we talk about educating and training staff, it's having that resource available for people to go to, or yourself to go to say, hey, before I spend new money or bring in some new free technology that may or may not be secure, before I do something that's going to take data out of the protected corporate environment, potentially violating intellectual property rights or creating legal liability for the company, can I do it with my current services? And if so, how? Modify workflows to use those features. Help people learn and understand that, hey, just because you've done it this way doesn't mean it's still the best way to do it. Try it this way, it's more efficient. Yes, there's a learning curve. You're going to have a dip in productivity while you learn it, but you will have gain over time as you get used to it. It becomes the new way of going. And when you look at new services, applications, tools, technologies of any sort, focus on integration when making those selections. And the analogy I use here goes back decades ago when I was a teenager, and my older brother got his first job at the end of the summer, had cash to burn, and decided he was going to upgrade his stereo. So he went out and got, a top of the line turntable, because it was vinyl in those days, a metal tape deck for high-end cassettes, and an incredible preamp, an incredible tuner. And that was it. He spent his money. He didn't have enough money to get the best speakers. In fact, he didn't have the money to upgrade any speakers. So after spending all that money to get the best of those components, the stereo he had didn't sound any better than it did before. Why? Because the capability of the stereo components were above the capability of the speakers. He went for best in breed of each specific component rather than best fit for best overall result. And so we talk about focusing on integration. Yes, product A may be the best at what it does, but if product B is close to that and better integrates with the rest of your environment and helps keep things simple from user experience all the way to the back end security and operation management of the service, then you're probably better off with option B, right? Now, there are cases where that might not be true, but if you focus there, then going one-off best of breed that doesn't integrate well becomes the exception and not the rule. And for too many small and mid-sized businesses, it's, hey, I found a tool that works, let's do it, without consideration of the integration, not only on the technical side, on the security side, on the admin and management side, but even oftentimes not a lot of consideration on the end user experience and whether it's going to maintain or improve efficiency or make things less efficient, more cumbersome for your staff. So we layer in technical capabilities. You have to layer in that change management. And yes, the change management is resources and it's expertise. And that's where we say, look to manage cloud services. Having a managed service, yes, we have tons of companies. We love them. They're great clients. They buy the licenses from us. They use our free level of service with it, and they self-manage everything. But again, if you're a 4-person, if you're easier numbers, right? If you're a 10-person company and one of your employees spends half their time dealing with IT issues or thinking about IT or deploying new technology, the whole gamut on average over the course of the year, then 5%, right, of your resources, your human resources, is now on IT. That's pretty high. That may be competing with your marketing and your sales efforts, depending on the nature of your business. So managed cloud services lets you offload that administration and management of your IT infrastructure, your applications, and your services to someone else, to an expert who specializes it. That's their job. They prevent problems, they resolve issues when they come up, and they provide you guidance as you need to modify, expand, improve, streamline, adjust your IT environment as well. You want to integrate education, training, and support as a strategic resource for you and your team. And again, I talked about this a moment ago in change management, right? It's not just, I think it's broken, can you fix it? It's, how do I do this? What's the best way? I think I need a tool to do this. Do I really need one? It's having that resource there strategically and building the culture that says, before I add something new, can I do it effectively and efficiently with the resources I have today? I might just not be aware of it. And it's not a bad thing, and it's not surprising, and there should be no shame in not knowing. Okay, both Google and Microsoft add dozens of features and capabilities every quarter to their systems, some small, some incredibly significant. And if you've never used them before, and your peers haven't used them before, it's okay. You may not know they exist or that they're out there, but we do. And so having that integrated culture, if you will, that says, hey, if you think something could help you be more efficient, here's a resource to go to figure it out and figure out how to do it without making our environment more complex, to keep it simple, keep it effective. You want to monitor and assess the utilization to drive adoption and change management. And yeah, we've had companies that have, for example, said, you know what, we're going to move to Google Workspace. And over time, we're going to get rid of the Microsoft Office desktop apps. We're going to migrate everything into Google Workspace. And fine, that's a great statement. It's a great direction. We support it for the right business, depending on your needs. And for many businesses, and a lot of small businesses in particular, that can work really, really well. But there's some issues and challenges. So for example, do you have document templates? Okay, you say you're going to make that change, but if you don't monitor and realize that, hey, wait a minute, people aren't converting their templates from the Microsoft editors to the Google editors, or gee, we're sending, when we send a link to a customer to look at a Google Doc or a Google presentation we've presented, they're converting it. They're using the auto convert feature and sending us back as a Word document or a PowerPoint document. So yeah, we're trying to use it, but our clients, our customers are sort of expecting something different, right? So if you monitor and assess the utilization, you can see features that could help productivity that aren't being utilized that you can introduce and reinforce. You can also see roadblocks. And sometimes that roadblock is a change of direction. I can tell you that, we've had more than a few customers who've looked and said, we love Gmail, we love the calendaring, we love Meets, but our client base as an industry is so embedded with Microsoft Office that 95% of our work needs to be done in the Microsoft Office suite. And we'll look and say that maybe, you should be moving to Microsoft 365 so that the integrated editing and collaboration features that make Microsoft Office even more efficient as a tool are available to you natively. And you're not trying to get things to work in different environments, right? And it works the opposite way as well. We've had companies who are embedded in Microsoft Office who look and say, gee, our industry is such that everyone's working in Google Workspace. We need to be there as well. And they make that switch and they drive the adoption and monitor it. But it's the monitoring and assessment that needs to happen. Obviously, we've talked a number of times about consolidating costs to affect savings, hard savings and soft dollars as well. And opportunity costs, you want to leverage those and match your service level to your needs. And so in our managed cloud services, we are defining 4 levels. Essentials is really the bare minimum you need to be up and running and know that if something goes wrong, you can still run your business. Basic adds to that as far as how quickly you'll be able to recover from an incident and more advanced protections. The business tier is really a set of services that's, best suited for small businesses as far as a robust IT environment that lets you best leverage efficiencies that are available. And Premier is enhancements that, you might want, particularly if you've got more advanced users or more advanced technical needs in your environment. And happy to talk to anyone about the levels and the differences, depending on your business and where it fits in. The goal is, however, that we can match the service package to the needs of your business. Again, keeping it as simple as possible, keeping it as affordable as possible, but still providing you with a well-defined environment where you know what you're getting, where you know what's not within your environment. And if you need, you'll have to add, right? And if you don't need it, then don't add it. That's fine too. We expect that as well. And so we have customers at all 4 levels of these services. Some sample tactics that people have used to simplify. One, pick a single platform for voice and video conferencing, preferably one that integrates with your calendar for one-click scheduling. Okay, so by definition here, I've said if you're in Google Workspace, use Google Meets. If you're in Microsoft 365, use Teams because it's one-click scheduling. It's built into the calendaring tool. So what do you do if you go to schedule a meeting with a client and you say, hey, I'm going to schedule a Microsoft Teams meeting with you, and they say, ooh, we prefer Zoom? Very simple. Say, hey, why don't you send the invite, right? You don't need to have people using the free, less secure versions of Zoom or paying for Zoom licenses. You can pick the service you want. If your client prefers a different service and expresses that client, have them book it with their service. It's very simple. When you accept the appointment, it's in there, right? But for what you're running internally, one-click scheduling creates greater efficiency and simplification, and having only one voice video conferencing service will save you money. Educate staff on document collaboration features. This is still huge. We talked earlier about shared documents and real versus serial collaboration. That's great. You know, Microsoft in certain subscriptions has AI-driven digital rights management, where it assumes things are draft. If it senses things have confidential information or it falls into a rule you've set up of what's confidential, it can automatically restrict distribution and manage permissions for you. Again, saving time and preventing mistakes. Develop templates and content repositories. Again, this can be done in either the productivity suites and it's several different levels that, depending on the nature of your business, you know, we had a consulting company that took proposal generation time down from 3 business days to about 2.5 hours, simply by having templates and a content repository. It wasn't even database driven. It was just searchable that let them pull their custom proposals together. Simplify your calendaring using a tool like Microsoft Bookings so that people can book time with you. Or, you know, our company, we use HubSpot for marketing and customer relationship management. We use the meetings feature in HubSpot, where we can give people a link and they can simply see our availability and pick a time, or we can suggest times so they can select from them. And that can dramatically simplify individual and group meeting scheduling, avoiding the back and forth and the miscommunications. Automate simple processes with no-code and low-code solutions where approvals and reviews and workflows can be managed and you know, controlled and managed in an effective way. Leveraging task level and project tools rather than manual checklists or spreadsheets. And also help, you know, this is an area of simplification, is separate your staff's personal and business lives. And this becomes particularly important if you have turnover or you have key employees if they left or something happened to your equipment, it could be damaging. So we recommend mobile device management for all devices, including desktops and laptops, so that personal information applications are separate from those of the companies. And if something happens, the company can delete or remove or protect their information out on that device. And using unified communication as a service, whether it's VoIP or other services, to hide personal cell phone numbers, so that company messages go into company managed voicemail, and employees can have their privacy and some separation between work and life, even when they're using their personal smartphone for both work and personal. So what are your action items here today? Again, we say assess your business objectives and challenges and look at how IT is serving the business. Are you happy with what you're getting? Do you wish it was more valuable to your business? Do you wish you could get more value and spend less money? If so, let's talk and let's set a strategy and prioritize the tactics we're going to do to get you from point A to point B. At that point, you can look at the benefits of moving forward and versus the impact or the damage for inaction, and decide what you want to move forward with. We'll then plan, manage the change in phases as needed, and execute to get you from where you are to where you want to be. The best thing to do is call us. So, oh man, my session here, my words, you know, it's a new year. I promised I wasn't going to do this, but I rambled on. You know, we're about 5 minutes before the end of the hour, but I do want to give and open up the floor for Q&A. And if you don't have a question out right now, but you come up with one later, you can contact us, info@cumulusglobal.com. Hits our inbound team. We'll get your question routed to the right person and get you an answer quickly. If you want to contact me directly, afalcon@cumulusglobal.com. My direct lines are, I don't have an administrative assistant, so emails and phone calls come directly to me. I will tell you I'm horrible about answering the phone when I'm busy and going back and reviewing voice messages and returning calls. Please, please, please send me an email. You'll get a much better response. So before I head into the questions that have been put into, that you guys are hopefully putting into the Q&A section right now, I'll bring it to the end. I'm going to thank those who are watching this recording as an on-demand webcast. I appreciate you taking the time to do that. If you have any questions, get in touch. We're happy to provide some advice, provide some direction, and see if there's a way to help, or if we can bring other resources to the table that you might need. So again, thanks for joining us.